Happy New Year, everyone! In this week's episode of BSD Now, we walk through dumping a PS4 kernel in only 6 days. We tell you the news that NetBSD 7.1 has been released, and details on how you run FreeBSD on a Thinkpad T470, and the progress in OpenBSD's pledge in this week's episode of BSD Now. BSD Now, episode 227, The Long Core Dump, recorded on the 3rd of January 2018. I'm still Benedikt Reuschling.
And I'm Alan Jude.
Yeah, new year, new BSD Now episode, the first one for this year, but it won't be the last, so we should get right into our headlines this week. Starting with NetBSD 7.1.1 has been released. And there's, of course, release notes.
Mm-hmm. So the NetBSD project is pleased to announce NetBSD 7.1.1, the first security/critical update of the NetBSD 7.1 release branch. It represents a selected subset of fixes deemed important for the security and stability of the OS.
Okay. So this is what people should apply after they set up their NetBSD 7.1. For security reasons. And, they listed the advisories that this covers, pretty much. So these are 2, 4, 5 ones. So there's apparently a buffer overflow via CMAP for graphics drivers. So there are, of course, links in our show notes for more details. And what's the other one? x86. Vulnerabilities in context handling and some other things that are relevant to the operating system core. These are more core-related stuff, not user-land.
Like the vnode reference leak in the OpenNet system call could leak memory over time.
Yeah, this one is something people should patch away to not get bothered with in the future.
Yes. And apparently a local denial of service attack in VI Recover, which is the tool that revives your VI swap files if you're editing a file when the machine crashes.
See, that's a tool people would not think as the first thing you could use it as a denial of service attack for, but well, you still have to make sure that all these utilities work the way they should and not be turned into evil things. But there were also some userland changes. Let's see. Yeah, so there's DHC relay that fixes a bug that prevented proper operation when run in the background. So this is probably related to DHCP. Is the P missing there?
DH relay is... Yeah. Because DHCP is done via broadcast, the messages won't go through routers. It only goes to people on the same switch in the same VLAN. So a DHCP relay allows a router to accept the messages on one side and relay them out the other side so that machines on the far side of a router can still talk to the DHCP server.
Okay. That makes sense. Yeah, I was just not that the P wasn't there in the
right.
The name. So
I think it's DH client. Or whatever. Yeah.
Okay, then Heimdall. So this is Kerberos related. They got an update to 7.1, which also fixes the one of the security advisories. M3. They write there that you don't modify strings stored in hash, otherwise filling up directory hierarchy stops if the same hash value occurs in directory and leave. So this is implementation specific here. There's a fix for ping. They fixed the checksum calculation for clearing the cached route. So also people think, well, ping, what could be wrong with ping? So it's an old utility, but it's still not perfect.
Some of the code is a bit crufty just because of how much of it is from the 80s.
Yeah, and then there's a resize FFS. They fixed numerous overflow errors which can lead to superblock corruption on large file systems. Oh, this sounds bad because when it concerns the file system...
Yeah, if you resize a large file system, make it even bigger, and you overflow one of these variables, then superblock is corrupt and you can't find any files.
Oh yeah, that's not what you want to have in your file system. Then there's router advertisement, RTADVD. They fixed the default value of R length time, so there's a PR for that linked to it. They got updates to bind, to XPath, to NTP, root.cache, and tset data, so that they had the latest time zone data available. And for VI, they fixed something that should garble the display when resizing in VI and Xterm, and also updates to WPA supplicant. They updated that to 2.6 and applied a bunch of CVEs to that as well.
Everybody remembers the fun with WPA supplicant a couple of weeks ago or months ago. I don't remember how long ago it was.
It all seemed like yesterday, and we were now looking at other stuff. But always good to have fixes, and people should apply that to the NetBSD system, and so that they are secure, at least from those attack vectors. Cool, very nice.
Good chunk of kernel changes, interesting ones including avoiding an integer overflow in kern_malloc, updates to the sys driver, which is disk controller, some more compat Linux and compat SRv4 fixes, fixed the file descriptor locking bug that caused Go to crash if it was, or where Go could crash the kernel on NetBSD, so you definitely want to fix that one. Fix an information leak in KTR user if copy-in fails, and a bunch of other miscellaneous things.
Yeah, and people should know that since the BSDs in general are in regular intervals pulling code from each other and obtain patches and other changes from other BSD systems, there's a good chance that some of these fixes will end up in other BSDs as well. So there's a rich giving and taking. In the first place. Yeah. They also listed all the architectures, but NetBSD has a lot of them, so I'm not listing all of them. They list also where you can get those patches from mirror sites, and they have a bunch of acknowledgements for people who worked on this release. That's also the sponsoring from the NetBSD Foundation. Okay, that's pretty much all for this release. So again, people should update in case they have 7.1 already. Our next story is dumping a PS4 kernel in only 6 days. So this sounds interesting.
This one is pretty interesting. So it starts by asking the question, what if a secure device had an attacker viewable crash dump format? Right. Oh. So the PlayStation is literally a black box, and normally you can't see anything inside of it. But what if you could view a crash dump? Then you might be able to see all kinds of information from inside the kernel. But what if that same device allowed you to put arbitrary regions of memory into the crash dump? So not just dumping what it wants to dump, but you being able to control what it dumps. And it says, amazingly, the PlayStation 4 tempted fate by supporting both of these features. So let's see how that turned out. So it says the crash dumping or crash handling infrastructure on the PlayStation 4 is interesting for two reasons. First, it's PlayStation 4 specific code, so it's likely to be buggy. The FreeBSD code has been worked on for a long time, and people have used it before. The PS4 one was written for the PS4 and probably not used by very many people. Second, if the crash dump can be decoded, we will gain very useful information for finding bugs and creating reliable exploits against the PlayStation.
Yeah, as a result.
So it says, on a normal FreeBSD system, a kernel panic will create a dump by calling the kernel reboot function with the dump flag. This leads to calling the function doADump, which will dump a rather tiny amount of information about the kernel image itself onto the storage device. On a PlayStation 4, the replacement for doADump is mdbg_run_dump, which will be called from panic or directly from the trap_fatal function. The amount of information stored into the dump is gigantic by comparison. The The kernel state of all processes, threads, and VM objects are included, along with some metadata about all loaded libraries. Other obvious changes from the vanilla FreeBSD format are that the MDBG run dump encodes data recorded into the dump in a field-by-field basis, and additionally encrypts the resulting buffers before storing it to a disk.
Okay.
FreeBSD now has support for encrypted kernel crash dumps, but it didn't in the version that the PlayStation is based on.
Yeah, they did some changes in the dumping area, so this is something people want to look at. So the gist of this up to now is that when it dumps a lot more information than a regular FreeBSD system would do.
Well, I think it's because the default in FreeBSD is to do the smaller dump, although you can have FreeBSD take a larger dump if you'd like.
Oh, sure, yeah.
It's a configuration setting.
More than you would ever know.
Yeah, so they have some deconstructed code of the actual run dump and fill thread info functions in here. You can look at those if you want, but the basics are dump state is a temporary buffer, which will eventually make it into the crash dump. When it calls systump internal call read user, that function can be made to read anywhere. Because it takes a base pointer, and that will point to the WebKit process, the browser that's the user interface on the PlayStation, to its user mode address space. Thus, even without changing the actual base value that gets fed into that function in the kernel, you can freely change the value of TCB_thread, which is stored 16 bytes after the base address. And further, the systump internal call read user will happily read from a kernel address and put that result into the dump. So we can now put any kernel location into the dump, but we still need to decrypt and decode it after that happens in order to get the data back out. Aside from that, there's also the issue that we can only add 16 bytes of data per thread in this manner. So you only get a little bit of data at a time.
I see where this is going.
Mm-hmm. So the crazy news about the encryption of crash dumps isn't just that they use symmetric encryption. They also tend to use the same key between firmware versions. This means that from firmware version 1.01 until they somehow realized it was probably a bad idea to reuse the same keys because they're exposed if the kernel was dumped, only versioned_keys 1 was actually needed. And there's an appendix that goes into detail there. After that point, crash dumps are still useful. However, you just need to dump the kernel once beforehand in order to obtain the key that will be used. But for most earlier versions of the firmware, you can use the key that was included in firmware 1.01, and they use the same key for quite a few versions. The crash dump encoding, which we've learned is called NXDP from the symbols in the firmware, is a simple run-length encoding derivative. It has a few primitive data types supported, and there's actually a parser included in the appendix to actually read the data out of the crash dump. So it says, this seems like quite a bit of effort for some 16 byte per thread, doesn't it? But it says, wait, it gets better. During testing, I found that I could only make about 600 threads exist concurrently before the browser process would either crash, hang, or just refuse to make any more threads. So with some simple math, if the full dump size is 32 megabytes, and the crash dump cycle time is about 5 minutes, and I can create 600 threads, and each of those 600 threads gives me 16 bytes of data, that means I can dump 9,600 bytes of data per crash. And if that takes 5 minutes, then to get the full dump, that'll take 11 days.
Yep.
But I was able to cut the required time down to only 6 days by being a bit more intelligent in choosing which memory ranges to dump. Normally, when dumping from software exploits, one would just linearly dump as much as possible, which has the advantage of bringing in the .bss section and other parts of the binary, and other areas which are handy for static analysis. With prerequisites for leaking the kernel out of crash dumps taken care of, I set about automating the process such that I could just let it run without thinking about it and come back some days later and have the shiny new kernel dump. Since the PlayStation 4 stores the crash dump on the hard drive, I needed a way to either intercept the data in flight on the way to the hard drive, or rig up some way to read from the hard drive between the panic cycles. Because otherwise, after each one of these, it's going to overwrite the old one, and you'll only get the last bit of data. Conveniently, it was around this time that I heard of the work of another researcher who had done against the EAP. This is the...
this is another...
it's the embedded application processor. That's part of the South Bridge on the motherboard on the machine. The details of that hack are out of the scope of this post, and there's a link to the talk for more details. But it's an embedded application processor that's built into the South Bridge, and the researcher had figured out how to get persistent kernel-level code execution on it. So using that knowledge, they were able to provide a replacement kernel to run on the EAP, which would detect when a crash dump was on the hard drive and copy it over to his PC as the machine is booting up. So, caused the machine to crash, write out 9,600 bytes of data that we've managed to extract out of the kernel, 16 bytes at a time from 600 different threads, write that to the hard drive, reboot. As it's coming up, the application processor reads that data off the hard drive, fires it off to a PC, and then the machine comes up, does its normal thing, and continues.
All the while, the friends standing around the PS4 asking you, hey, why aren't you playing with your PS4?
Why is it rebooting every 5 minutes?
It's dumping. Happy days. Okay.
Yeah. So it says, with this capability and some small hardware modifications to connect the PlayStation 4's power switch to the network and simulate input on the PS4 with a Linux USB gadget, I was able to simply script the entire process. So there's an example. This code runs on the PC and speaks to a web server that basically remote controls the PlayStation 4. So it says, in order to progressively dump the regions I wanted, I created a simple JSON schema to record metadata about which could be used to tie the individual thread IDs to the kernel addresses which their portion of the crash dump would contain, as well as maintaining the base address used per each run using the get dump index. Below is a snippet of JavaScript executed in the PlayStation 4's browser process in order to actually cause the crash dump.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of code here for people who want to really get into this.
After a panic and crash dump would occur, the PlayStation 4 would reboot and go through its standard FSCK. The control script would then cause the PlayStation 4 to enter suspend mode, at which point the EAP kernel would take over and upload the crash dump to the PC. Once on the PC, the crash dump could then be decrypted and then parsed and extract the 9,600 bytes of data. Then the process would start all over again, and it went on for 6 days. This has been fixed somewhat. In firmware version 4.50 of the PlayStation, the crash dump key generation method was finally changed to require knowledge of an asymmetric key in order to decrypt the dump contents. The above version of the sysdump output establish secure context on dump, which is a long function name, is from firmware version 4.55. The nonce 3 is the value which will be used as the crash dump AES key. This value is only stored in the dump within an RSA encrypted blob. As such, a new approach will need to be, a new approach will be needed to attempt key recovery. So they generate a random key, use it to encrypt the crash dump, and then encrypt that random key with a public key, and then only someone with the private key would be able to decrypt that and get the random key that's actually used to encrypt it. So for now, with newer firmware, this doesn't work on the PlayStation anymore.
But I guess people are still interested in hacking the PS4 a little bit more, so we might see a little bit more about this in the future. So this is interesting. This is certainly something you wouldn't expect from a gaming console, that people just dump cores on it for 6 days.
It's a Unix running machine. It's a FreeBSD machine that's running software that people would like to know more about.
But the interesting thing, so if it has a dumping facility, did they put in something where you could send some of the dumps to a remote server for analysis, why the dump happened in the first place, as a debugging?
I imagine that was the original design, was that when the PlayStation crashes, they could send the results to Sony so they could try to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, with the encryption and all that. But
the final bit here just says, this is probably the most convoluted and lengthy setup I've ever done for a bug which amounts to just an information leak, but it was a fun experience.
Oh, certainly,
They have the appendix where they have the crash dump decryptor and the decoder for the crash dump format.
Okay, so for people who want to try this out, if they are not on the 4.55 dump version, the patches haven't been applied yet, so they can still use their older PS4 patch level versions to do this. Well, yeah, might be interesting to see inside.
Well, moving on. This week's episode of BSD Now is brought to you by DigitalOcean. Head over to digitalocean.com and pick out a droplet and get started.
Yeah, so for example, you thought your New Year's resolution would be, I should start a blog for this year. So you could get to DigitalOcean and start yourself a little droplet with your basic blogging software in there. Maybe you want to run your standard issue LAMP stack, or you want to run a WordPress site. Then you could get this set up on DigitalOcean pretty quickly, because they have pre-built images for that. And
they have pre-built application images, so you can literally pick out a specific application, click a button, and in less than a minute, the application's up and running. Or, if your New Year's resolution was to learn how to BSD better, then grab one of these. It'll come with just BSD on it, nothing else, and then build up that stack, right? Install the web server, the database, the application, configure it, get it working.
Yeah.
And then delete it.
Oh, yeah.
And do it again.
Next step. Yeah. So document it, repeat it.
Yeah. Once you get it all working, delete it and do it again.
Yeah.
That's how.
And then invite some friends over and tell them, hey, why don't we work as a team on this DigitalOcean droplet? Because they also support a team feature so that you can have multiple people join in the joy of administrating your DigitalOcean droplets.
It's quite handy when, for example, at our company, we use some DigitalOcean droplets for things, and I need other people to have access to them, but not to have access to the billing. And, I don't like sharing my passwords with people. So this allows me to just invite people, and they can then have access to create and manage the droplets in my account. The other nice thing about this is I have one account, but I have access to 4 different groups. It makes it very easy for me to tell what's what, and I just have the one account, and I can just get the list and switch between them, and it's fine. Whereas, on some other service, I might have to have 4 separate accounts and try to, make sure I'm logged into the right one or whatever. And this one, it always says in the top corner which project I'm working in, and I can easily switch between them. I don't have to, log out and log back in and have a different username. And
they provide you a nice little dashboard with all the metrics and stats that you need to know about your little droplets. And they also give you an overview, of course, how much they would currently bill for you in this month or in this period where you're running your DigitalOcean box. And remember, if you don't want to use it anymore, you just switch it off and delete it, and you will not get paid or billed for this anymore, because it's just cloud computing as it should be.
Yep. Like I said, it takes less than 55 seconds to get started, and they have lots of locations to pick from. Spool it up in San Francisco, Toronto, New York, London, Amsterdam, Frankfurt, Bangalore, or Singapore.
Yeah, around the globe, wherever you might be.
One of those is going to be better than the others for you, so do that.
Mm-hmm. There's no excuse for not you're running one in your area or close to it. And experiment a little bit with different software, with FreeBSD, any other operating system you always wanted to try, if there is any other that you are interested in. So, yeah, this is something people should look at.
Yes, and help us out and help yourself when you sign up. Enter the coupon code FreeBSD Now, and it'll add a $10 credit to your account.
Yeah, so that we can make sure that your experience is a nice and easy one, so you don't rack up a large bill at the beginning.
Yes. Plus, it's also prepaid, so there's no surprise bill like you would get with an Amazon.
Yeah. All right. Our next news item is a recap of the actual conference organizer of BSD Taiwan himself, Li Wen. So he wrote a nice little recap of how the whole thing went on the FreeBSD Foundation's website. So this is like a trip report or a blog entry here. It begins with, so last month we held BSD Taiwan 2017 in November. People who were there will probably never forget it. And I saw the pictures and I was like, I should have gone. But yeah, so he writes, it was the second largest BSD conference in Taiwan and the first one in this decade. In 2004, the first Asia BSD Con was also held in Taipei. Then all of the following Asia BSD Con conferences were held in Tokyo, Japan, and Asia BSD Con 2018 will be in Tokyo again next week, or this year again, pretty much. Talk proposals have already been submitted, so the deadline has already passed. And the conference itself will be on March 8th till the 11th. He also writes, we wanted to start small with the first BSD Taiwan because we were not sure how many sponsorships they would get or how many volunteers you would get. BSD Taiwan 2017 was a single-track, 2-day conference with 11 selected 50-minute presentations and 1 work-in-progress lightning talk session consisting of 8 short talks. I do regret that we did not have any local presenters this year. It's also a similar problem of Asia BSD Con. Unsurprisingly, he writes, as with Asia BSD Con, the travel reimbursement took up a large part of the whole conference budget. We do have many good people that work in Asia, but we still need to encourage people to present their work more. Yeah, so this is why also we had this conference sponsored and made sure that it was a success. So he continues, we had over 130 registered attendees. Wow, that's good for pretty much a first-time thing. So with 30% of them coming from outside of Taiwan. So that's good. To our knowledge, in recent years, this is the only open source conference in Taiwan to be held entirely in English and to have such a large portion of international attendees. This is also the first open source conference in Taiwan to focus entirely on operating systems. The attendees included students, professors, engineers or CTOs, and CEOs from technology companies. This is also the first time that Graph the BSD Goat visited Taiwan. Oh, excellent. Yeah, he's going to pretty much all of these BSD conferences. So we were surprised that after the silence for so many years, there are still so many people that use and love BSD near us. We saw that many old friends who had disappeared for a long time came back and were glad to meet many new friends at the conference. I'm also really glad that this conference was able to bring together these people from local and abroad. After attending BSD conferences around the world for many years, I feel that the friendships between BSD users is the most important thing in the BSD community and one of the main reasons people stay. Yeah, this is certainly true. And it has been his pleasure to bring this community back to his friends in his homeland. So after the 2-day event, he truly understood that bootstrapping a new conference is very hard, and this is a lot of effort. One with many aspects that you don't even imagine until you're really into the process of planning an event. I now have an even greater respect for all the conference organizers and realize that we need to have more people help them to keep these conferences continue to get better and better. Plus, there will always be room for a new conference. Oh yeah, this is certainly true. I mean, these people are really exhausted on the last day after the closing session is done, but they're also relieved that everything went well and it was such a success. But we can't thank them enough for doing all this, and they keep doing it over the years. So this is not.
It was a number of years ago now, but Dan gave a talk at EuroBSDCon about organizing BSDCan and how that works. It might be interesting for Li Wen to do something similar for, some of the surprising things you didn't think about when you decide to organize a conference and then realize, oh, hey.
I didn't think about that. Okay, so thanks for the FreeBSD Foundation for being the biggest sponsor of BSD Taiwan 2017 and always being the strongest backend of our community. We were excited about the many local companies and organizations that helped us, whether with people, materials, or financially. We even had 21 personal sponsors, more than 2 times the number of other big open source conferences in Taiwan. Wow, this is cool. So as he said, in the closing session, he's not sure if there will be a second BSD Taiwan next year, or in 2018 in this case. It still depends on the amount of sponsorship and the number of volunteers he will get. However, we will definitely hold more smaller meetups in the next year to keep building up the local BSD community. And finally, in the beginning of this month, he had a post-conference media workshop for organizing the media files they collected at BSD Taiwan 2017. And they had a bunch of links here. We have that in the show notes for a review. Oh, yeah, this is a review article in traditional Chinese and with photos. And there were also a bunch of photo albums I saw on Flickr. So this is something to catch for people like me who couldn't get there, to catch the event in a different light and not just read about it.
And they say the videos will be published and announced through their social network. So they have Facebook and Twitter links, and we will keep on top of that and let you know as soon as the videos start showing up.
Yeah, so thank you, Li Wen, and your team for making BSD Taiwan conference such a successful one. And yeah, certainly there will be more activities in this area. So yeah, let's keep up the good work. So, time for our news roundup this week, starting with running FreeBSD on a Lenovo T470. Or 470, actually.
T470S.
Oh, yes. S, that's important, yeah.
Yes, so Michael has put up a blog post with some details about his new laptop and how his experience has been. It goes on to say, installing FreeBSD on this machine was super easy, as I couldn't find a comprehensive/encouraging how-to about installing FreeBSD on a recent ThinkPad. I just wrote up the one below. It includes details about my personal setup, which are not required to run FreeBSD on this model, but which are more of my own taste. I still think this can be quite useful inspiration for others who want to run their own customized configuration. So, starting with the specs of the T470S, he's got the specific model number since you can custom order, and there are many different models of T470. But this one is an Intel Core i7 6600U with two 2.6 GHz cores, plus hyperthreading, 20 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM, 512 gig NVMe storage device, the Intel HD 520 graphics with HDMI 1.4 output, a 14-inch display at 1080p with a non-glare IPS screen, 3 USB 3.0 ports, a Thunderbolt 3 connector, and gigabit LAN, plus Intel 802.11 wireless, support for Bluetooth 4, and an LTE microSIM, and a card reader and a 0.9 megapixel webcam. He also added a fingerprint reader, docking port, and so on.
Okay, that's a decent machine.
So the first thing, he looked at what actually works. Accelerated video does work. The keyboard works. The touchpad and clickpad, like you'd expect on any modern laptop. The SSD, the Wi-Fi, sound, HDMI, suspend and resume, and webcam. Things that don't work are the fingerprint reader and any of the other things that he didn't actually test. It says the battery life is okay, but maybe could be better. So it says, I used a snapshot of FreeBSD 12 as the basis for the installation. In particular, he used the one from December 13th. They're published about once or twice a week, or once every 1 or 2 weeks to the FTP site. So he just DD'd that onto a memory stick, booted the laptop, started the installation, and created an encrypted ZFS pool on the NVMe device using encryption, swap encryption, and the GPT partitioning scheme, and boots it with UEFI.
Very good.
He grabbed the ports tree from the day he did this, December 18th, and made some changes to his ClickPad. He says, I'm not a fan of using the pointing stick, so he disabled it in the BIOS. My final ClickPad configuration will be click to click, so no tap to click, no middle button, right button in the lower right corner, as the old Synaptic driver doesn't handle good thumb detection. Yes, I disable tap to click because the palm detection is usually not very good. He went so far as to actually make a custom kernel, commenting out a bunch of the debugging stuff, which makes sense because you want a high performance machine. Although it looks like he probably could have got away with just using the generic -no debug version of the kernel rather than doing this. And he added the evdev support to the kernel. Again, I would also recommend, rather than copying generic and making a my kernel, you make a my kernel that includes generic, or in this case, better yet, generic -no debug. And that way, when new things get added to generic, they're not missing from your custom kernel. But then he compiled his custom kernel, installed it, and rebooted. Enabled the evdev support, set a sysctl to control the mask for the events, enabled the Synaptic support for the touchpad, set up the wireless for Germany, set up his SSID, and then to get the graphics, he had to install the DRM-next-kmod, which is a kernel module that supports basically brings the Linux driver over into FreeBSD. And then installed, Xorg, XF86 input evdev, and XF86 video intel, so that he would have the touchpad and video support as well as Xorg.
It's pretty straightforward. So,
Yep.
For people who want to check out those specific options for the Intel-based videos or the Xorg setup in general.
Yeah, it looks like he patched his version of Xorg to play with the evdev stuff. And he provides the configuration files and so on that he used. That he installed some additional packages like, Compton, Firefox, the Intel backlight control, Redshift, etc. Then he installed DWM, so he would have a window manager, and set up his Exinit RC to fire off all the things he wants. And it says, in conclusion, installing FreeBSD on the Lenovo was quite straightforward, and it's a great machine for work and leisure.
Oh, yeah. And he has pretty much provided all the instructions how to replicate this on other systems, especially the Xorg setup, so people could pretty much transplant this to their other laptops. We also provided a link to other laptops, not only Lenovo, but other makers and manufacturers you could think of that were tested with compatibility regarding FreeBSD. So if you're in the market for a new laptop like I am, you could check that big table there and figure out, this is a decent laptop and it supports FreeBSD quite well enough. So this is something people can make a choice and make sure my new laptop is running my favorite operating system, of course. All right.
Yeah, so basically this is a big table of like every laptop somebody that runs FreeBSD has ever used and what works and what didn't at the time.
Mm.
So,
Yes.
Most of your major models of Dell, HP, Lenovo, etc. are on here.
Yeah, so the usual suspects are covered because the chance is higher that developers will have one of those and write drivers for it if there's a need for that.
Yep.
Okay, our next item here in the BSD bits is the FreeBSD desktop live CD creator. So this is over on GitHub, and it's called Comet. So it's basically a FreeBSD desktop live CD creator. The purpose of this tool is to quickly generate bloat-free images containing stock FreeBSD and supported desktop environments. So this features FreeBSD 11.1 release on an AMD 64. It can create GNOME and KDE desktop environments and a hybrid DVD/USB image. And there are a couple of screenshots provided so you can see how this might look like. And requirements, if you want to run this or make use of that, is FreeBSD 11.1 system or higher if there's a newer version out. 20 gigs of disk space needs to be free, otherwise it's difficult to store these images. And 1 gigabyte of free memory is recommended, as well as either UFS or ZFS, although with ZFS we always recommend to have a little bit more than 1 gigabyte of memory.
Well, that says 1 gigabyte of free memory.
But right, yeah. So I thought this was the upper limit. Yeah, so definitely have 1 gigabyte free, and then you should be ready to go. So the initial setup is basically to run the package install command to get your Git, your grub PCBSD, grub2 EFI, and xorizo. This is for the ISO creation. Then you clone the GitHub repo that we're looking at currently, and then you enter into the commit/source directory, and then you run, in case for GNOME, /commit, and then provide GNOME as the parameter, and that will start building this desktop image. So I'm not sure whether you see some output there, but at the end you should get a little, or not so little, DVD image, like an ISO image, and then you can use CD record to burn this to a DVD, or if you have a USB stick handy, then you can DD this to your USB device. Same for KDE, you just provide KDE as a parameter this time, and the commands to burn and copy it to the USB stick is pretty much the same as for the GNOME example. The credentials, it's always good to have like an ISO image, and it's also good to know the usernames that they created for you. So the user for this one is live user, and the password is FreeBSD. But of course, once you logged in the first time, you can use passwd to change that. So this looks pretty forward. I'm interested in the part that it's bloat-free, so that it doesn't add more extra stuff, because I could think of this as my first lab in my Unix course. So I just give this to people and say, build yourself your own FreeBSD system in, I don't care which desktop environment you run, just have a system ready at the end of the class or something. Yeah, so people should check that out if they want to experience some desktop magic on FreeBSD. And
yeah, it'd be interesting to add Lumina as a third option to that.
Oh yeah, right. Once those two have been sorted out, I guess it's easy enough to add another desktop environment of choice so that people can run their preferred desktop environment.
I'm also so interested in how it's doing the DVD ISO hybrid image.
For USB and the CD?
Yeah, for USB and CD, because it doesn't seem to be doing the typical way, which is using syslinux. Although it looks like maybe it's using grub to do it.
Oh, because of the packages they install?
Well, I'm looking at the source code as well.
Ah.
Yes. Anyway, I'd be very interested in FreeBSD having hybrid images that didn't require grub or syslinux.
Mm. Yeah, well, we'll nudge some people and tell them about this.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you were speaking actually about Lumina, which brings us to our second sponsor this week, IX Systems.
Yes.
Head over to ixsystems.com. Your storage experts, your server experts in anything related to open source hardware or server needs. So in case you're building a new system that's running mostly open source, then you might think, do I need more memory? Do I need more disk space? Or should I put in more CPUs? And this is the right time to call IX Systems, tell them about the system's purpose, what it's going to do in the future once it's set up, and they will build the exact system for you that's built for this exact purpose.
Yeah. The really nice thing is just the level of support you get through the whole process when it's pre-sales and just deciding what it is you want. And then as you finalize that and actually place the order, and they give you, this is when you're going to get the system, and we're going to test it first. And so all the problems will be solved. Give us this, fill out this installation worksheet, and we'll use that to make sure the machine's set up exactly how you want it. So when it does arrive where we ship it, it can be taken out of the box, thrown in the rack, and it's up and running. No extra fuss.
Mm-hmm.
But, you get fast and reliable quote. You get fast and reliable building and shipping. The servers are well built. It's like SAS cables cut to length and stuff. It's all nicely bundled and super clean.
Yeah, it's the small details that make a difference. Some vendors just use the standard cables that you can buy everywhere. But IX System has this little extra touch to the system to make it extra nice.
Yes, it always comes out great. And that support goes all the way through the process. So even years after you bought the machine, something goes wrong, they're still there for you.
Yeah, so for example, they have something on their blog about the storage crypto ransomware. So this is a little article by Michael Dexter. And he writes, that there are still these encryption software out there that targets NAS systems, and they will not release, the data until you pay a certain ransom, which you might never get your files back. And on an IX Systems-based FreeNAS box, you pretty much are protected from that because they use ZFS with snapshots and rollbacks, could prevent if you are ever targeted by that. And it's also the fact that they are not using a standard GNU Linux systems because the IX Systems are using FreeBSD, and those vulnerabilities or cryptors usually target the GNU Linux systems actually. So this is one way of they protect the users. And they also make sure that they don't expose the Samba accounts by default to the open internet, which you should never do. So this is unless you want to have that, which is a bad idea. So IX Systems make sure that they not just build the software or build the system for you, but they also make it secure by default and make it easy for you to use and configure it the way you like.
So moving on to our next story.
Yeah, this is about pledge progress in OpenBSD. So we covered pledge a couple of times before in previous shows. So remember, pledge is pretty much their mitigation technology to make sure that sandboxing technology, right? So that in case something is been exploited in whatever way, it stays within the sandbox and has no way of accessing other memory areas or parts of the system. So it's trapped basically. But there's updates in the pledge work that the OpenBSD folks are doing. So in a message to OpenBSD Tech, this is of course over at undeadly.org, Theo the Rat provides some insights into the ongoing work in pledge. So he writes, I wanted to give an update that 2 pledge-related changes are being worked on. The semantics and integrations are complicated, so it is taking some time. So one is exec promises. So this will become the second argument of pledge. This allows one to set the pledge for the new image after pledge exec allowed exec VE. There's also a warning attached to that. Utilizing this in software isn't as easy as you might think. The fork and exec startup sequences need to be studied quite carefully to ensure the newly executed child doesn't ask for more than the parent's exec promises. So in his experiments...
Yeah, so the basic idea with pledge is that the program starts up, it does all the things it needs to do that require like privileges or root access or whatever, and then you run the pledge command or call the pledge function, and it drops all the privileges it no longer needs, And the main loop of the program is just going to be, reading and writing from files or whatever, and not doing anything that requires privileges. So you lock the program down to a small subset. The problem is that in Pledge, what they did is if you exec another program or another copy of the same program, it gets outside the sandbox and it's completely open again. And then with the idea that that program will then do its initialization and then sandbox itself. But not every program is sandbox and so on. So with this exec promises thing, the idea is that when you exec, the child now will already have some limits on it. But you have to make sure those limits are set correctly, because if it tries to do anything beyond what you've limited it to, it's going to just get killed.
Yeah, so that's what he described here. And it also, he also mentions that this feature also needs to be used with great caution, especially in privileged programs, as Alan said, because programs which fail to observe the errors may continue operating forward very incorrectly. You've lost the ability to catch it failing and provide care by fixing the problem. The other thing that he mentions is pledge paths. So the semantics there are still being tuned a bit. Before the first call to pledge in the process, one can pledge path directories. Then later, after pledge is being run, file access operations only work in the traversal of the path crossed on one of the pre-declared directories, but better make sure you don't move to a directory, because those will not work. Something similar is being worked on for files, but we are still adjusting that, as well as a flag parameter for the pledge path call, which may constrain the operations done on such files. And as such, pledge path will become file system containment mechanism, unlike change root, because paths will still be based upon true /. So patience is the essence here.
The game for now.
Sure. But they're still, working on this and making it more secure than it already is. And this is looking promising. And I think we're going to see something about this in a future BSD conference.
I'm sure.
Okay, our next story. Oh, this is also nice. The anatomy of T program on OpenBSD.
Yes. So T is like the greatest invention ever for pipes. Right? So if you visualize a pipe, when you have a T in a pipe, now the pipe goes to two places instead of one. And that's what the T program does. You take the output of one program, you pipe it into T with a file name, and then you pipe that into the third program. And this basically has T record a copy of the stream to the file and then pass the data through anyway, meaning that you get to save a copy and send it to some program. So it says here, the T command is used to read content from standard input and displays it not only in standard output, but also saves a copy to a file. The source code for T in OpenBSD is very simple, and I want to give an analysis. So first, T leverages the singly linked list defined in sys/q.h to manage outputted files, including standard output. So there's a struct list, that's a list that has the name and the file descriptor for each of those.
Yeah, next entries.
And
this
so
is pretty much...
function. Yeah, there's a function to add a new file descriptor and name to the list, and the main just for eaches over that list and does the work. So it says, to understand it easily, I extract the macros from sys/q.h and created a file that utilizes those macros instead.
Oh yeah, I see what... Yeah, so this is typically a typical assignment you would give a computer science student to program. You define what a list is, how these are being linked with pointers and all that. And this is pretty much all defined in a header, so you can just use them and don't have to re-implement it all the time.
Yeah. Then he used GCC's preprocessor feature to actually flatten out the macros. So he runs GCC-E on it. It gets rid of all the macros and turns it into pure C.
Yeah, so it's more readable this way.
Well,
A little bit.
generally the macros are probably more readable, but it means you can see what the effective source code actually is.
Yeah.
It says, as you can see now, the head node in the list contains only one member, the singly linked list first, which points to the first valid node. For the elements in the list, it is embedded with a next structure, which points to the next element. And by default, T will overwrite the output file. If you want to append, you have to add the -A option, which we see here. It will open either in append or truncate mode.
Okay.
The next part is the skeleton of saving content to files. As you see, as it reads, it for eaches over each of the open file descriptors. And then for each one, it writes out the data.
Oh, yeah, that's about the interrupt signal.
And so it says we need to iterate over every open file descriptor and write the contents so that one copy goes to the pipe and one copy goes to each file, and you can have multiple files. And then finally, there's the interrupt signal that will cause T to exit. You can disable this feature with the -I in case you want the interrupt to not touch T.
Yeah.
And you can see that it sets the SIG_int for interrupt to ignore.
Mm-hmm. Okay, this is always nice to see how these standard Unix utilities work internally and how relatively simple they are.
Well, yes, and Q.H is just a really nice BSD thing. It's just all the well-defined things you need already built. Singly linked lists, double linked lists, tail queues, etc. Not the things you should be writing yourself.
Yeah, because there might be errors in those, and you might as well include something that other people who have tested this and used it extensively have used for years, and make sure that you have all pulled from the same source file.
Yeah,
cool.
It'd be interesting to look at to see if there's things that could be done to make T even faster.
Oh yeah, some benchmarking, some improvements there.
Or something. Mm-hmm.
We're getting ideas for the new year. Time for our Beastie Bits this week, starting with what I learned from reading the OpenBSD's network stack source code.
Part 1.
Part 1, of course, yeah.
Yes.
There's more.
So this post here says, since the OpenBSD network stack internals talk by Claudio Jecker at AsiaBSDCon 2008, there's been noticeable changes to the OpenBSD network stack.
Well, yeah, it's 10 years almost.
Understatement. Obviously, the removal of using the softnet task queue for forwarding IP packets, which is done, and now it basically runs to completion for each packet instead. For me, to understand the processing of incoming packets, it helped to look at the network stack and a graphic. So the graphic is kind of large, so I'm going to try to scale it so you can kind of see it. But this is what happens when a packet comes in.
Yeah, it all looks so easy, but the kernel is doing a lot of stuff to make that happen.
Right. So the Ethernet device driver feeds it into the kernel if input, and then we process it, and then we decode the Ethernet, and then depending on the type, we figure out, oh, this is IPv4 or IPv6 or ARP or reverse ARP or MPLS or whatever. Assuming it's IPv4, then we do IP input from interface. And then we figure out, oh, is this for us, or is this a packet we need to forward, or is it a CARP packet, or is it an IPsec packet, whatever. And if it's forwarding, then we feed it to IP output, where we have to then send it out some other interface. And then, oh, it's actually to be forwarded to loopback, so we'll go over here. Or we actually output it over the Ethernet card and then queue it for the NIC, the hardware, to send it. Or it's not, and it gets scheduled for the network to process it, and then, does it go to PPPoE, or a switch, or the bridge interface, or PPP, or IPv6, or ARP, or IP4, etc. Or is it a pfSync packet? So it's IP, so then it goes to IP deliver, where then we look at the next level packet, whether that ends up going in, ICMP, UDP, TCP, etc. all gets processed to the network stack.
Every layer is there.
Yep. So it starts out saying, stern warning, this is my understanding of OpenBSD's network stack internals by reading the source code, and this is by no means a case study and by no means correct. The above graph shows the input of a packet to the network stack by the Ethernet device driver. This is done by at the lowest level, and is the lowest level, which is layer 1. At the next layer, layer 2, you have Ethernet, and layer 3, you have IP, and layer 4, you have TCP or UDP, etc. And it walks through how all that works. And it says now, depending on the payload and any open sockets on the user land, and a few other conditions, like if the socket is spliced, the packet is processed differently. But typically, it is done by copying the mbuff packet into the right socket's receive buffer, if that's not full, and notifying the socket wake up. And so the program that was waiting for that data will get woken up, run, read the data out of the socket buffer, and do whatever needs to be done. Anyway, there's lots more detail there. It's definitely worth checking out. And we'll have to keep an eye out for part 2.
Yeah, maybe there's a comparison from like the stack, how it was 10 years ago, or some other ways of internals that are happening. So there you get kind of the appreciation of what the TCP stack is doing in a daily operation. But we're not done with networking yet. We have another item here. Broadcom BCM 43224 and BCM 43225 Wi-Fi cards now supported by BWN.
Yep, the driver on FreeBSD. So the DX11 core revision and some PCIDs were added, and now those two devices are supported on FreeBSD.
Oh, excellent. More chances that people can do Wi-Fi now.
The NFI support in BWN is a GPL license and is not included by default. Until this is replaced with Broadcom's ISC licensed NFI implementation, BWN must be rebuilt to enable the NFI support. To build it with NFI support, you have to add a new kernel option saying that you agree to the GPL. To test BWM with these new devices, install a firmware from the net/bwm-firmware-kmod port and place the following lines in your loader.conf to cause these devices to start working.
Okay. Seems straightforward. So people have those
I
chips.
don't know much about the Broadcom model numbers to know if like that's the model you might find in a Dell laptop or if it's like the one for Raspberry Pi or where... you know, what these particular Broadcom devices are, but...
Yeah, in case they show up in your D message, then you can make them work.
Yep.
All right, our next item is a little bit more details about searching man pages from Ingo. Is this Ingo Schwarze? Yeah, it is. So this is a mailing list post over at OpenBSD-MISC.
Yes, so a user writes in and says, I can't get the manual page for the cd command, you know, to change your working directory. They say, when I try, I get the manual for cd, as in the AT-API or ATAPI or SCSI CD-ROM driver, when they type man cd, and when they go to man.openbsd.org/cd. So the response from Ingo is, cd is not actually a standalone command, but a shell built-in. It's not even possible to implement cd as a standalone command because the effect of the intended change would end when the program exits. Right? Your current working directory is relative to the currently running program. Right? So you start a shell and you change your directory, and then if you start another shell, the new shell is in the same directory, but if you change the directory to a third directory, and then exit, when you get back to the first shell, it's still in the directory you left it in. So if cd fired up, changed the current working directory, then exited, you would end up in the same place where you before you ran cd and wouldn't actually do anything. So cd is one of 40 or 50 or more commands that are actually built into the shell. there's a man page called built-ins, but I don't know if CD actually has a very detailed explanation of it.
Even people coming from DOS would know what CD does. And
separately, Ingo points out that in general, when man gives you the wrong section, or the wrong man page, you might specify the chapter or the section. As you know, there are 9 sections in man pages in general.
Yep.
So there's a couple like chroot. There's both the command and the system call, and so you have to specify the chapter in order to get the one you actually are looking for. And so he mentions that to do that with CD, you do man1 CD, or go to man.openbsd.org/cd.1 to get that specific chapter. Of course, in this specific case, it doesn't help because there's no actual manual page for CD because it's part of another man page.
Oh, yeah.
He says, your next try, if the manual you're looking for doesn't exist, should be something like man-k. And in this case, he does any ~CD and then an escape $sign. But he mentions that you can read the apropos man page to learn what all that means. But this will give you about a dozen results, and the shell manuals you're looking for are among those results. So you can see that if you do that, you see CSH, which is a shell, and FTP, which has a CD command that's slightly different, and KSH and SH, and so on.
Yeah, this is a little bit more man page searching magic, which is always helpful. I mean, it's totally impossible to know all these Unix commands out of your minds. So this is definitely something you need to know when you're working with Unix, how to run man pages and find the stuff you're looking for effectively. Yeah, so nice.
What runs through using less to open all those man pages at once out of the results of the apropos command, and then being able to search through them for the keywords you're looking for.
Very nice. Always good to know. There's always more you can do with man pages.
Yep.
Okay. Our next item is dtrace and ZFS being updated on NetBSD, moving away from old open Solaris code. Oh, interesting.
Not really moving away from it so much, but this is a story we covered a little bit when we saw the mailing list post a while ago, but Chuck Silvers of the NetBSD project has been working on updating the ports of dtrace and ZFS to NetBSD. Part of this is rebasing them on the FreeBSD port rather than on the Open Solaris port to avoid having to redo a lot of work that's already been done on FreeBSD.
Oh yeah, I remember we had this once in an episode.
Yeah, so if I remember correctly, the current patch is based on what was in FreeBSD in like March of 2017. So while that's a very big step forward for NetBSD, that's getting a little bit behind FreeBSD nowadays. But I guess probably pretty close to what's in 11.1. So, but once that big step is over, the rest of the steps should be much more doable. Yeah, that first step is a doozy.
You're saying that now, but once you're into the depths of the code, then you never get out again. No, it's good that to get not only ZFS but also dtrace at the same, because you can pretty much use dtrace to help you debug some of these porting issues you might have. All right, very nice seeing NetBSD getting more support in the ZFS area and dtrace. Our next item like, here.
This one is newer, maybe? Maybe not. Okay, anyway.
Could be. Yeah. So moving on to our next item, about an announcement here that the BSD certification group is joining the Linux Professional Institute in their efforts to make certifications in open source more available and a wider spectrum. So instead of having these separate two entities, the Linux Professional Institute on the one side and the BSD certification group on the other, they decided, we should pretty much bundle our resources and work together to make a little bit collaboration, or actually quite a bit collaboration.
two small, understaffed groups trying to deal with this, it made more sense to combine forces.
Yeah, so this is a press release that we have here. And I'm going to meet a couple of the LPI folks at FOSDEM. So as I'm proctoring the BSDA exam there as last year, so we're going to add a little bit faces and do discussions about future efforts that we're doing together. So this allows pretty much the BSD certification exam could also now be taken where there's this professional institute test could be taken, and this way there's a nice interchange between the two.
Yep. Matthew Rice, who's the executive director of LPI, says the new partnership is mutually beneficial, and the LPI will better fulfill its mission of advocating for the use of all free and open source systems. And Drew Levine, the president of the BSD certification group, says BSD Unix use is growing rapidly and globally, with BSD professionals involved in every industry. Joining efforts with LPI will help us scale our exam delivery while maintaining the quality of our certification program.
Yeah, so I talked to her a little bit back at VBSDCon about this effort, and she asked me whether I could help out a little bit with, not only proctoring, which I already do, but also being on calls that they have from time to time and make sure that both have the same level of representation or focus on future endeavors in this kind of program. So yeah, very nice. In this, and the last item that we have is the FreeBSD Foundation thank you donors video that we put out. Is it last year or this new year?
This one is for this year.
Okay. So this is from pretty much all the members of the FreeBSD Foundation. We put together a little thank you video, some in their own native language, some in English, of course. And this is pretty much thanking all the donors that we had this last year, 2017, big and small, whether people gave $5 or $5,000 or even more. We wanted to thank them, and this is pretty much the thank you video that we created for you. So thanks for your donation. It helps not only putting FreeBSD into the limelight of other people so that they know that it's existing, but also supplying developers with travel grants or sponsoring conferences and outreach efforts. So this is a big thing, and we're grateful for your donations, and look forward to seeing many of you in the future years, maybe at a conference or making more efforts. We haven't done the planning session for 2018 yet. We're still scheduling our board meeting that we have each month. But stay tuned. There's some good news coming, and I'm not spoiling it now. So there's good stuff in the pipeline that we're preparing for you. So thank you again, and see you in 2018.
Yep, so I'll play that video quickly now.
Oh, really? Oh.
Thanks.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you.
Thank you for making a difference.
いつもご支援ありがとうございます。
Dankeschön.
Thank you.
Thank you.
谢谢。小夏梦。
Thank you.
спасибо.
Thank you.
On behalf of the FreeBSD Foundation, I want to thank you for your support. Your donations will allow us to continue supporting the FreeBSD project and community worldwide. Thank you.
There we go. And we're back.
See, now people are like, oh, Benedict can speak German really well.
What a surprise.
Yeah. All right. Before we go into our feedback and questions section for this New Year's episode, pretty much, we should mention our third sponsor for this section. This is Tarsnap, of course.
Thanks, Tarsnap, for making this part of the show possible.
Yeah, they provide online backups for the truly paranoid. You thought about probably making a backup recently, and you thought, I should probably store this somewhere where it's safe, outside of someone else's reach in case something happens, something someone steals my hard drive or whatever. So you want to store this in the cloud, but you're, again, paranoid and make sure that you need to encrypt this properly. So Tarsnap provides the programs and the infrastructure for you to make that work. So they provide a little program called actually Tarsnap. And if you know how to use tar, then you pretty much know how to use it. It generates a key locally that will then encrypt your data, then deduplicates the data to make it a little bit smaller, and then uploads that data into the Amazon cloud, making sure you're the only person who has the key, is able to decrypt those backups. And in case you need them, you just pull them back from the cloud and do the reverse, and then you have your files back, and making sure you're the only person being able to do that. Not even the Tarsnap, infrastructure people or the Tarsnap designers could get to your data because you're the only person having the key. There are different operating system clients for that. The Linuxes of this world, the FreeBSD systems. There's macOS client and also the Windows subsystem for Linux as well. So there's no excuse not running Tarsnap and not doing backups.
Yeah. It's really easy to get started. You just sign up on the website, give them $5, and get started. You want to back up your files. It's
New Year's resolutions and all that.
Yes,
make sure to.
New Year's resolution last year should have been to back up your files, and so that means if you haven't done it this year, it's really, really, really important. And you know what? We could pause the video, and you can go do it, and come back, and it only takes a minute.
Yeah, it's that quick.
Really important though. Make sure you keep this key safe. If somebody else gets the key, then you've just blown all the usefulness of Tarsnap by giving other people the key. But also,
giving away.
If you lose the key, no one can access your data ever at all.
Yeah.
That's the point. Yeah. If you want to destroy the data, it's off in the cloud. You can never be sure they erased it completely. But if you destroy the key, no one can access it. Right?
Yeah.
And you just make a new key and back up the stuff you want to back up, and you're fine.
Yeah.
But if you lose your key, you can't restore. And if you can't restore, what was the point of doing the backup? So make sure, there's a way to do a hard copy key and keep it somewhere safe. Probably your best bet.
Mm-hmm. All right. We are now going into our...
Say BSD now.
Oh, yeah, sorry. All right. Feedback and questions this week. Actually, the first one is by Alex. He writes his first FreeBSD bug, so he has a bug submitted. And he has written us a short message. So he submitted bug number 223349, and he's at a loss of what else he could do to gather info to help fix it. So this is over at the FreeBSD bug tracker here about the FreeBSD bootloader fails to boot after the install. So there's a little description about his...
This might be related to... no, it goes back to October, so maybe it's not. There were some recent changes to the boot code in FreeBSD 12, the current snapshot, that maybe are causing this issue. But it looks like it goes back a little further.
He writes down there, he found the issue, and
well,
the system...
it doesn't sound like he actually solved the issue, he just worked around it.
Right. So he writes, system needed MBR rather than GPT, had been working with other machines that needed GPT and completely overlooked it on the setup wizard. Okay.
But it is possible there's an actual problem there, because somebody else was asking me about almost exactly the same thing this morning, so I might keep an eye on that one.
Might be a larger issue or not just affecting a single person.
Yeah.
Could be. Or we need to engage, investigate this a little bit more, where this is coming from and what's the cause. You're way more into the boot code than I am, but...
yeah, but it's not an easy place to debug things, so...
Yeah, it's very limited environment because, it's the very early boot stages. But yeah, thanks for submitting this, and we're keep hopefully people updated with something is happening or fixes that are being committed as things are discovered. Next one is John, suggested speakers. So he writes, gentlemen, long-time listener, first-time feedback provider. Thank you for producing a great podcast, including the pre-recorded to maintain weekly regularity. Oh, yeah. Your podcast makes an ugly commute go by quickly and productively. Oh, great. Thank you. So he also writes, thank you, too, for promoting BSD conference. I finally made it to his first FreeBSD con with your arm twisting. So 2 suggested speakers for interviews, I guess. Will you have the TrueOS member on or about the upcoming TrueOS stable release?
Yeah, we've been poking a couple of people. We'd likely hope to get... what's the other Moore brothers' name? I'm blanking on that name now.
Chris, Ken, and...
Ken. Have Ken on to talk about Lumina, because I'm very interested in that.
Yeah, we want to hear that ourselves.
We were just talking about the forthcoming FOSDEM will be the anniversary of when I asked Benedict to take over as my co-host on BSD Now. And then that at Asia BSD Con will be the anniversary of the actual handover. And that means we should get Chris Moore on again. So we're going to try to do that.
Yeah, this is a good excuse to do that. So we're trying to do a bunch of interviews, not only for upcoming conferences, but in general to keep up with, because people are very interested in interviews in general, and we should do a little bit more of those if it works with the scheduling and all. So his other suggestion is Paul Vixie's VBSDCon talk was time well spent, and would love to hear him on our show talk more about his mentoring junior engineers towards defensive programming, including least privilege and ability to survive. Be liberal in what you can accept and conservative in what you send. Oh, yeah. Did we have...
I'd love to talk to him more, and I think I convinced Paul Vixie to submit a talk for BSDCan. I need to poke Dan and see if he actually did submit it.
Excellent.
But yes, I very much enjoyed Paul's talk as well, and hope to have him come out.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, John. Hopefully this won't be your last BSD conference. And,
yes. Come again.
Yeah. Now we got the BSD bug, then you pretty much have to go to most of those.
If you enjoyed VBSDCon, consider BSDCan. Basically, VBSDCon had, one big stream of stuff. BSDCan has 3 or 4 of those. And even more people. And even more stuff.
And it's every year. VBSDCon is only...
Every 2 years, exactly.
So yeah.
Canada's not that far away.
See, Alan is pitching hard. But it's a good conference. Definitely worthwhile. All right, our third one is from Todd. He has 2 questions for us. He writes, hi guys, I'll be brief. Love the show and effort you guys put in every week. First episode 20 went over FreeBSD jails. Towards the end, you mentioned putting out another more advanced tutorial. Could you guys work on that or maybe give us some tips?
Yeah. We haven't done tutorials in a while. They're really hard and time-consuming, and we just don't have time. We can answer specific questions, which I think you seem to have going here.
Yeah. So he's trying to find the best way to combine ZFS and VDEFs and SCH, Beehive, and jails together. In addition, if you have a good info on PCI pass-through, I would love to run an OpenBSD firewall with carp and relay-D on a VM in front of it.
So Beehive with hardware pass-through for a network card is pretty straightforward. It's just in your /boot/loader.conf, you have to load the Beehive module, which is vmm.kl, and give it the PCI ID of the card on the pass-through list so that FreeBSD won't attach to it and it'll leave the device unused. Then when you start Beehive, you just give it the PCI ID and it will pass the device in. I think the Beehive man page tells you how to do it. If not, somebody should rework what's on the wiki pass-through page into the man page.
Yeah, the handbook should have that so that people can use it, because if people don't know about it, then they think it's not working or it's not there. Yeah, good suggestion. So his goal is to create an ultimate networking appliance as a project for work, His stumbling blocks are little things like does he accept traffic on the WAN interface and use RelaD to load balance it to a tap jail and send the output to the LAN NIC. So there's a bunch of components in there. So
is there reason to use the tapped jails? Like, generally for jail, you would either use ePairs or the regular jails with like internal addresses. I'm not sure what you're exactly trying to do there.
Maybe because it's a WAN interface or WAN.
No, that doesn't have anything to do with why you would try to use a tap interface in a jail.
Yeah, so if you have by the way,
a little more detail, maybe with not a diagram, but just more detail on what it is you're trying to accomplish, and I could probably propose a couple of layouts.
Oh, did you experiment with setting the MTU to 9K a little bit in VMs or for beehives at least?
Not really. I think I looked at one or two things at a time, but in general, I found that I could easily do more than a gigabit through the VM, and I rarely had more than that network bandwidth, so it didn't matter. But I know that people have definitely managed 10 gigabits with beehives before.
Yeah, okay, because I may have an option to test that in the future, so maybe. Okay, cool. So his second part is that I did a great slideshow on Ansible on FreeBSD that you would love so far, or that he loves so far. He loves to get further EM examples on spinning up and configuring VMs and configuring, say, reverse proxies and such. Yeah, I could do a second part maybe. I need to... I've continuously updated this slide deck each time I gave it. At each conference I have it. And so as much as I use Ansible and the more stuff that I do with it and the stuff they have available in the system, the more I do with it, the more stuff I document and put in the slide deck so other people who have similar interests can use this just the same way or apply this to their needs. So yeah, this is certainly a good feedback. Glad that you liked it. And this could be a follow-up talk or a second set of things that I did with Ansible or other systems. Yeah, could be a thing I could do. All right, cool. Thanks for that feedback. And last but not least is Matthew with CentOS to FreeBSD. Oh, this sounds like a migration story coming up. Mm-hmm. He writes, Hi, Alan and Benedict. I've been playing around with FreeBSD for a while now, and I'm finally ready to start switching my home infrastructure to it. Business to come later if all goes well. Oh, wow.
Goodie.
Exciting. Can we give him any advice or help with the migration from CentOS 7 to FreeBSD? So he needs to run his DNS, the MB server, and the backup server for his business systems to send backups to. So he can configure bind easily enough, but doesn't know much about jails or how performance compares to things like MB server or Plex server.
As far as I know, the Plex server performs exactly the same on FreeBSD as it would on Linux. So that should just work. You don't have to use jails for any of that, although you can.
Yeah, but you should totally use ZFS on FreeBSD for all the backup purposes. If it's not something proprietary that you're using as a backup server, then definitely use ZFS and snapshot sends over the network. This is certainly...
Yeah, like when you say backup server, it's kind of vague. Like, do you want something like Bacula, or you just need like a file share to dump things to? Because that's not really a backup, but...
But if it's business related, then probably...
Mm-hmm.
For his business systems to send backups to. Yeah, then it depends on what kind of systems those are running. So if they're running CentOS, then...
Bacula is probably your best bet because it's nice and cross-platform.
Mm-hmm.
And there are lots of tutorials on Dan's blog on how to run a Bacula server on FreeBSD.
Do you know what MB is? I'm not familiar with that. It's
another video home entertainment type thing, similar to Plex.
Okay. Well, yeah. So it's a good way of migrating. So not all in a big bang and home and business all in one. So test it out in one
if
area.
you ran all these things on CentOS, then just running them on FreeBSD will be fine, and you don't need the jails. You can add the jails maybe after when you've had a little more time to get used to it, rather than trying to, dive in the deep end at the beginning, right?
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes people try to do too much at the beginning, and then something doesn't work right away, and then they get frustrated.
So your best bet is probably get it working, and then maybe consider trying to get it to work in a jail instead of just on the base system. But if you were willing to run it on the base system on CentOS, it's not going to be any worse running it on the base system on FreeBSD.
Mm-hmm. And this would be a totally nice way of a follow-up story or a blog post, like how you did the actual migration and what worked, what didn't, what kind of the stumbling blocks were. And so, yeah.
And if you have more questions, do feel free to email us and we will try it out.
Mm-hmm. Actually, we need a bunch more submissions in the question section. We're running a little bit low.
We need your help, like you specifically. Write us some questions or at least some feedback or ideas or whatever you have. Because otherwise this section of the show will be empty next week and it'll be your fault.
Help us help you.
do you want to be the person that ruined the show for everybody?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Come on.
You don't want to be that person who did it. Everyone will point at you.
Just send us feedback at bsdnow.tv. And
this is infusing the show with
questions and comments and ideas for things to do on the show, ideas for things to do with the BSD, ideas for interesting things to work on, whatever.
New Year's resolutions in the BSD area, like how many commits you want to do.
Stories that you read that we haven't covered, things you would like to hear more about, things you'd like to hear less about, whatever. All right. Thank you. Yeah. We'll see you next week. And, maybe there'll be a feedback section. Maybe there won't.
We'll see.
Up to you.